this computer. All right, guys, so we are back with another Pickled Dragon Unscripted, and we have with us today some very fine folks and from around the globe, if you will, parts of the United States and parts of the Middle East. The Arab Gulf is what I was told, and we are very happy to bring you a show where we're going to talk about differences in gaming between possibly the States versus other places around the world. And this is our very first installment. And we're very pleased to bring you four good friends of mine. First, we have Ham, and I'm going to let you take it away and introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So my name is Hamad Alnajjar, and my friends call me Ham because it's a lot easier to say. And what I do basically, I'm an ex-corporate junkie, actually, to be honest with you. So I used to work in the financial sector for many, many years. And then like about 4 or 5 years ago, I saw the light, packed it in and started doing, focusing rather on stuff that I love. So what I do today is I'm a soft skills instructor, a radio host for the Arab world's only live to broadcast or live to air heavy metal show. And I just love my heavy metal.
Nice.
So that's just the way it is. And so yeah, other than teach and DJ, I also do a little bit of illustration as well. I've worked with a few published indie works, and let's see. I would say really that takes up the bulk of it. I guess. Well, no. How can I forget this? The biggest thing, or the main thing that I do, is I also work for an indie MMORPG as their lead world builder and their in-house illustrator as well. So I'm one of a small team, and these guys basically are called Niche World Cults. The game is called Monsters and Memories, and it's basically kind of a hat tip to old EverQuest, if you will, and kind of reviving that old school style MMO, and I'm happy to talk about that more later if you guys are interested in hearing about it. A nice little shameless plug over there, but that's basically what I do, and I have been essentially a gamer, a tabletop role-playing gamer for now 35 years plus. I mean, like most of my life I've been doing it, and my role has mostly been that of a DM, GM, the person who basically runs the games, and I've been designing games and gaming content as well in a local capacity for the better part of the last 3 decades, I would say. So that's me in a nutshell, guys.
Awesome, very awesome. Next, we have the Super Beast himself.
Hi, I'm Nasser al Alawi, or sometimes called Nasser Super Beast. I have been introduced to Dungeons and Dragons by one of Ham's players like 21 years ago, and I have been hooked ever since. So I'm the gentleman who started the gaming community here, like actually made an official gaming community in Bahrain. And from that point on, I think it grew. Another thing that I do a little bit of writing for some of the tabletop RPG companies. Some I can talk about, some I can't. I did some writing for the Black Void RPG, just some character creation, stuff like that. And I kind of work a lot with tabletop RPG game designers, but not in a writing capacity. Like I give advice and stuff like that. Other than that, you will catch me in the Mr. Mean Discord. And sometimes you'll see me play in his Mr. Mean Speaks YouTube channel. And that's it in a nutshell, basically.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. One of my old friends, Rachel, coming to us from snowy Wisconsin.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Yeah. So for my day job, I work in a church as an office admin, just organizing volunteers and things like that. And on just kind of on the side, on like my hobby side, I like to illustrate and do commission artwork for, it's almost exclusively turned D&D now. Like it used to be like whatever, but I kind of have that. Most of my stuff is other people's D&D characters, or I've done a couple covers for Matt's books in the past and things like that. So it's been lots of fun. I stream artwork on Twitch under the handle Marquee Gaming. Me and my husband both run the channel together. And so it's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons artwork. And also we run a game together on there. Lots of fun stuff. So that's where you'll find me. You'll also find me on Pip400 Art on Instagram, where I post my artwork and things like that.
And your website too.
Oh yeah, and I have a website. I always forget that. Probably shouldn't.
Yeah, Pip Art has her website where she shows off her art as well.
Yes.
That's awesome.
All right, lastly, we have our esteemed Dragonlance scholar, the Lady Gold Moon herself, Ashley Evil.
Yes, Evil. Close enough. Yes, so I'm Ashley, and I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I have played it before in high school, a couple of times. But yeah, basically I read a lot of Dragonlance novels. That's like my specialty, I suppose. Also into Magic the Gathering. I've been playing that for a couple of decades now, I suppose. And I do a lot of landscape type of work. And I've done YouTube videos before. They're out there. They're all heavy metal related, mostly.
And they're
And that is another one of my fortes. So that's about it for me.
her YouTube videos are actually how I found Ashley, because I found like she's got this way that is just awesome. You have to go check out her Lady Gold Moon Lance. I think it's just Gold Moon Lance, isn't it?
Gold Moon Lance, that's like my Instagram, but my YouTube channel is just Gold Moon.
And we are today we will be converting Ashley and trying to give her some tips and suggestions on how to run her own game, because she wants to start her own Dungeons and Dragons game.
Yes.
And Ashley's going to be going on this journey through a number of these shows, or all of these shows, hopefully. And Rachel is going to pop in, and obviously I like to have a good group, and friends of the channel are always welcome to come in and take part in conversations. So we might have Ham and Super Beast back in the future. And just a little plug, we are arranging our second. Now this entire series is known as Gamers Worldwide. So this particular series where we talk to people around the globe is called Gamers Worldwide. And the very next one will be folks from Puerto Rico and how they got into gaming, which I think is going to be a very, very interesting twist, as it involves a hurricane. But we'll be filming that in the very near future. But to kind of kick things off, I'm really interested in knowing if there are differences in not just styles of play, but the content when Ham or Nasser, when you guys run your games, how much does your culture influence your choices, the challenges your players have to overcome? And I know, Rachel, you've run games, you've run a bunch of games for the last couple of years, and you're still interested in learning more.
Oh yeah.
And I love to hear about different perspectives on running games, because it's I've been almost exclusively a DM for almost 40 years now, and you kind of start running on empty pretty soon, and then you have to take that break and kind of reprocess and realign your mind. But when you talk to interesting people like Ham and Nasser, it is definitely a jolt to the system, and I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say about running games.
Sure. So when I ask you, just to get a clarification though, when you say like how our culture kind of impacts on how we run games, are you talking about like, let's say, are you talking about historically speaking, like, or like, let's say, in terms of how our own myths and legends kind of play into our stories, or are
Could
you
be any
talking
of
more?
that. Yeah.
All right, so okay, so we'll kind of go broad and narrow down then, I suppose. So I guess the important thing to start off with is context here, right? So when we talk about, Middle Eastern culture, or more specifically Bahraini culture, where we're from, maybe if I can kind of take a moment, this might not be a moment, but take a moment to just sort of give some kind of context as to like gaming in Bahrain, or tabletop gaming in Bahrain, how it kind of came into being, if you will, and then how it more or less evolved from there. And I think Nasser, I can like let Nasser segue into that. So tabletop, you have to understand, Bahrain, first of all, is a really, really tiny country in what's more commonly known as the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf to us. What do you call it? And literally, if you look at Bahrain on a map, the word Bahrain is much bigger than the actual country, right? We are such a tiny, tiny sovereign entity. And where we're located, basically, so we've got Saudi Arabia as our closest neighbor. We're an archipelago of islands that sit somewhere between Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE, right? The United Arab Emirates. And we are very, very central, if you will, centrally located in the world. And so why that matters is because it influences our consumption of basically pop culture and products and things like that, right? So we get a bunch of stuff that comes in from Europe and a bunch of stuff that comes in from the Americas, right? Now, it's important to realize that when you go back as far as like the early 80s and things like that, material was nigh on impossible to get over here. Like if you were to ask me, Hamad, how did you even start gaming? And it would be those little green spine books that you see back there. Those are basically the Fighting Fantasy solo game books. And they and their ilk were an accidental find for me in a supermarket of all places, on a dusty shelf when I was in there with my dad. And I must have been like maybe 8 or something years old at the time. And I just saw this really, really cool cover of like this robot wrestling a dinosaur. And I thought, wow, I had to get that book. And I just wanted to read a story, basically, right? But when I took the book home and I realized that you could make a character and then you could make decisions, you were the hero of the story and you could make decisions on behalf of the hero and affect the ending and stuff like that. You had to roll dice as well and fight the creatures that were in there. And to me, that was just, it blew my mind. And, I remember like scrimping and saving, and basically I would sneak off. I wasn't allowed to go into that neighborhood walking, you know what I'm saying, where the supermarket was, but I'd sneak off and go over there just to sort of sift through those dusty shelves to try to find more of these green spined books, basically. And the second one that I picked up was a fantasy based one. And I was hooked. That was it. I mean, my mind suddenly opened up to the world of fantasy. And then a very, very dear friend of mine gifted me with my very first fantasy novel and said, read this. It's not a game book, but it's really great. And it was actually the Dragonlance. It was the first book in the Dragonlance trilogy, right? So basically, and that's it. I was a fantasy buff after that. That's it. Hook, line, and sinker. I was in there, right? But the thing is, again, I come back to the point that books were just not readily available. So when it came to basically wanting to play or having groups or whatever, this stuff was, we sucked it up by osmosis, basically, right? So it's like, a friend of yours travels, he comes back and he hands you something called a Dragon magazine or a Dungeon magazine, and you see all the ads and the games and things like that in there. So I got that little box set as well, actually. That thing's almost as old as I am. But yeah, when I got gifted that, basically just opened my world up to like how limitless fantasy tabletop role-playing games could be, right? But then there was a problem. Okay, because you want to talk culture. Well, one, nobody knew about this type of games. Okay, the first starts. Two, all the material was in English. And although this is an Arabic country, the fun little thing about me is that Arabic is actually my second language. I started learning it later in life. I was a native English speaker, but that made me a bit of an anomaly between my own people. if you will, right? So, and not just my own people, my own family. Like, my mom to this day does not speak a word of English. I want you to imagine a 15-year-old kid or a 13-year-old kid walking up to his mom after school going, "Feed me, woman, hungry." You know what I'm saying? We're trying to communicate with sign language and stuff like that. But that little anecdote aside, it was kind of telling of what the cultural environment was at that point in time. You were seeing people who are youth who were becoming bilingual because they had exposure to public schools, they had exposure to expatriates that were living in Bahrain at the time, and so ideas were trickling in, interests were trickling in. You got books from here, a thought from there, an interest from here, and what have you. And my love for the game made me start learning Arabic, because I would start translating my games and my ideas into a language I could barely speak at the time to people who could not speak English, just because we wanted to play, gosh darn it, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how it took off over there. And this was all circa the Gulf War period, right? So it was insane, like we'd hear the warning sirens go off, so for like the potential air raids at the time. And then, we duck, or what would we be doing? We weren't watching the news. We were we were on Kryn, and we were playing our little campaigns over there and things like that and having fun with it. So, some people have, and also not least of all, have kind of given me, I guess, I don't know, the honor basically of they say that I kind of brought D&D to the masses here in Bahrain. I think that's maybe immodestly speaking, it might even sound obnoxious to say that. I didn't introduce Dungeons and Dragons to Bahrain, but I think maybe what I did play an active role in is basically I managed to get a lot of different groups of people interested in it. I think there were other people who were playing it at the time, but they might have been cliquish or just had their own thing. It wasn't a communal kind of activity, if you will, right? But I actually managed to get about like 7 or 8 groups of people interested in the game, to the point where they started buying their own books. They started bringing stuff in when they would travel abroad and things like that. And, it kind of spread around a little bit, if you will. And then years later, Nasser kind of picked up the torch, if you will, and he actually turned it into an actual community here in Bahrain, like officially. And he would host an introduction to role playing, meets and just get beginners and newbies completely interested in it. And this is all circa like 5th ed, if you will. So the days when I was very active with it was more kind of your basic Dungeons and Dragons era into kind of 2nd edition, if you will, right? Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So that was a very long-winded way of kind of create context, if you will. But the long and short of it is, Bahrain is kind of an isolated country. Getting stuff back then was very, very difficult. But when we did get it, it really kindled a fire over here. And there was a small but very active group of gamers, and their interests lay basically in, we were hungry for this stuff because, it just, you couldn't find it. And so we were really starved for it when we got it. We were very excited. It was very magical to us, when we had it. And that kind of played into it. Now, culturally speaking, yeah, we had language barriers to overcome. To this day, we still hear people crying out for, we want tabletop role-playing game material in Arabic. And yet it is such a difficult transition. It's so difficult to transition mechanical terminology, if you will, and things like that into Arabic, but it's there. And nonetheless, language was not a barrier to people who wanted to play. So that's one. 2, gender segregation, right? So growing up, going to a public school here in Bahrain, the schools are segregated by gender. So it's not to say private schools were mixed, public schools are segregated. They're still segregated to this day. In fact, but generally, especially in Bahrain, we do have a bit more of a mixed society. But back in my day, it was a rare thing. This was the kind of proverbial phoenix's egg, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think if you had a woman or a girl who could play with you in the group on a regular basis, my gosh, that was finding a unicorn. It was just something really, really rare, something very, very exceptional. And more often than not, the women who did play with us on a regular or semi-regular basis would be expatriates. Now, and that has to be part of our context as well. Bahrain today has a population of plus minus 1.4 million people. Okay, so yes, very tiny country, but half of that is expatriate. there's a transient culture kind of here, right? So, and back then, of course, we were less than 1 million people. And, finding a Bahraini or an Arab woman or girl who'd play the game was just nigh on impossible. You wouldn't find it. The game did not have that kind of an appeal, okay, to a female audience back in the early 90s, I would say, in Bahrain. Today, it's a thing. That today you have all female groups playing, female communities that are active, and they kind of run their own thing. And I mean, how far have we come, basically, right? So to me, it's a wonderful, 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 and wonderous thing, to say the least. And finally, I would say, before I hand off to Nasser, so I've hogged up the entire show, is in terms of how our own mythology and let's say historical sort of influences play into our games. Funnily enough, I think every DM is kind of different, right? Or every group is probably different. But the last thing I wanted to do was kind of play our mythologies. The world had so much to offer. There was so much rich, fantastical, and historical context out there that that kind of became more or less my focus. And I only turned to the Middle East, or to Middle Eastern folklore, if you will, when I stopped. I took a break from Dungeons and Dragons when 3rd edition kind of came out, right? And I shifted my attention to playing Vampire the Masquerade from the World of Darkness books at that time. And I ran the game here in the Middle East. The game was basically centered here in Bahrain, and it was this alternative. And that was my first time kind of deep diving into my own culture's folklore. But since then, I've never looked back, because what I realized was a lot of our history and our folklore has literally been written out of our history when the nation when the region adopted Islam. So anything kind of predating pre-Islamic history or material on pre-Islamic history is limited, especially in English. But when you find it, oh my gosh. And I'll tell you what, Al-Qadim, it is not. Okay, it is not. It's very, very different and very, very rich as well. And it's something, to really hold your head up high about. Actually, it's beautiful. It's really, really wonderful. But I'll tell you this, it's not your sort of Sherazad and, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and Aladdin's and things like that, right? It is not that at all. But yeah, so, in summary, sorry, go ahead.
Just to a source a book or a source someone could, if they wanted to look into your culture, Bahrain culture, that you're speaking of, that you could suggest.
A book, I wish there was a specific book that I could recommend. Let me put some context to that. Even if I wanted to say dig up on, let's say the pagan gods worshipped before Islam, I would say just at a baseline level, you will find source material in Arabic, but in English, even a Google search, you'd be really hard pressed to find anything that wasn't superfluous or very, very, shallow, any kind of depth or interesting things like that. I don't know I should say, any document that kind of compiles or aggregates that stuff in English. And so you kind of end up having to piecemeal, let's say, lore, you know what I mean, from various sources, and kind of putting things together yourself. But I wish something
like a source book in the making.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's very, very, very true. Very true. Is
there a particular culture or mythos outside of the Middle East that really spoke to you when you were first running games and tackling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I and still to this day, by the way, I'm so enamored with with the old sort of semi-civilizations, right? So your Vikings and your Celts and what do you call it? But the old what do you call it? Babylon. I mean, Bahrain, technically where we sit. I mean, we're technically a former Mesopotamian enclave, right? So, in fact, some people argue that Bahrain is the physical location for the figurative Garden of Eden, right? Like the origin of humanity, if you look at it from the Abrahamic books' context. So, what do you call it? We have ruins here that date back to 3000 or 3500 BC. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's walking a trip down our small, humble museums is. It'll take you back some, but yeah, I mean, Babylonian culture fascinates me tremendously. Ancient Persian culture fascinates me tremendously. The Greeks, the Romans. I don't think there's any culture that doesn't really just sort of lick my brain in one way or another and just makes me kind of twitch in all these fun places, right? So I mean, like, even when you take like the Far East as well, and the Near East, the Indian culture, or the Indus Valley culture, the what do you call it? The Siam or Siamese culture, the Japanese culture. I mean, my God, all that stuff is just so mind-boggling and fantastic, and of course, yeah, let's not forget the Americas as well, right? So the Central American civilizations, Aztecs, Mayans, and stuff. All that stuff is amazing to me. It still blows my mind. I'm still to this day very immersed in researching as much as I can about that, and I love taking little bits and pieces and throwing it into my content, really.
Yeah, and that's actually the last few books I've written, last few adventures I've written have had that Mayan, Mesoamerican focus, the prison of Kos. I really got into that kind of Mesopotamian culture, and I must admit that I'm not a scholar of the region, and but it's very easy to mix up the different cultures, whether you're talking Aztecs or Incans or whoever, but all of it is just fascinating to me, those people. But I'm going to invite you, and you may not know this book, but in third edition there was a what's it called, a independent publisher who released a book called Ancient Kingdoms Mesopotamia, and I actually have the book. I'll have to try to pull it out, but it was kind of a 3E. It had a collection of adventures in it, and I think there might have been there's always new spells and new feats and all that stuff, but all Mesopotamian themed. Curious what you might think of that. We can talk about that at a later date. But anyway, I'll let you get back to it, because I'm Gavin, and I'm more interested in knowing what you guys want to know. And of course, anyone can pipe up, just butt in if you have a question or anything that you might ask.
I think maybe I can hand over to Nasser for a little bit, like let him kind of throw in his own 2 cents.
Well, unlike Ham, I was very lucky when it came to introducing people to D&D. We started in a video game convention in 2016. That's when I decided to start a community. And we were very lucky because a lot of these, a lot of the younger generation were, like, we never had this problem of inclusivity, because you had girls playing video games, you had the guys. Nobody looked at that thing. This was never a thing for us. So if girls wanted to come and play, it was cool. Some people didn't know what Dungeons and Dragons was, and some people did. Like, so when we first introduced the books and dice in the convention, mostly it was positive. I wouldn't call negative. I would call it more funny, because people thought, like, one gentleman thought that the dice would kill him if he touched it. So that was one of the funny stories. I wouldn't call that negative.
How long did it take you to talk him into touching it?
I think it was my friend who was at the time helping me out. He just picked up the dice and rolled it and said, "See, this is like a dice. If you ever played a D6 game, this is the." So you just explain it to him. It's like, because they look weird, right, when people first see them. So I would call that a funny story more than a negative story. Mm-hmm. But from that point on, well, speaking of culture, most of the younger generation, especially here in Bahrain and the Middle East, are exposed to Japanese anime. It's a big thing for them. A lot of them grew up on Japanese anime and like these Yu-Gi-Oh cards and stuff like that. And me being a person who likes medieval fantasy and trying to get that across was because I read, like, I'm a guy who read Dragonlance and stuff like that, and read, of course, Forgotten Realms. So there was a bit of so I had to adjust to accommodate that, like what they liked. So I had players like, can I use a katana? Okay, let's reskin the longsword into a katana. Yes, you have a katana. Can I call my character in a Japanese name? Yes, you can. And there was a lot of that. But luckily, the shift happens when the Witcher video game comes out. Like, they started thinking, oh, this is cool now, because it's closer to the medieval European fantasy, right?
Yep.
And I can see the change, right? Like, oh, now even in the cosplay, you see some of the kids dressed as the Witcher and the later cons. So there was a change, and I can see it recently because last games I've run, people were more into the European medieval fantasy than they were into Japanese. The Japanese will always be there; it's part of the culture. Did I see any of the Arabic influences that we have here in gaming? No, not much. Like you see one guy who wants to have a camel, like a paladin with a camel. Yes, I've seen that in the game. But other than that, like, not much. Did I use some of our mythology? I used some of the local legends here, like the old tales where they scare people with, like, I used that for inspiration to actually, like, create monsters and stuff like that, or even create villains or situations in games. But that was, for me, basically what I've used in my games. When I see other people from the younger generation running, I've seen people who, it's mostly, a lot of it is Japanese. They are really inspired by the Japanese. And I'm seeing a lot of Witcher coming into it, which is cool. There's a balance there. But I can tell you this, when I got when I got in contact with the Saudi community, of course, they saw our community, and I had, when they were starting their community, they came up to me and they said, so what did you do to start your community? And I told them. Now they themselves are starting to, they've already translated a D&D Arabic character sheet. They've done I think the 5th edition rules, some of them, they have been translated to Arabic. They're working on that on their own. So, which is cool to see that, like, we didn't, we kind of helped over there in a way. I don't know, maybe inspired.
Sometimes,
which is great.
That spark, like to push someone to get rolling, like getting any project, no matter what, whether it's a writing project or building a fort or whatever it is, getting started is always the hardest.
I love that point where I'm not taking credit for anybody's work, but I just like I just like to be like that feeling where, like, we inspired. That feeling for me is like, I don't want to take anybody's credit. It's all them. Like when Ham actually introduced a player to D&D, and then 21 years ago, and then that player introduces me. I think that's how it is. Play it forward as a gamer. That's, I think,
I agree. I agree with that. I think there's this wonderful thing. And you know what you love about the game and what keeps you there, what keeps you playing it, right? And when you see it kind of spread, you see other people kind of catch the bug. It's such an elating feeling. You know what I mean? When you see it kind of spread and you see a different, like, I use the term loosely, but let's call it a different demographic playing, saying, like, younger people, mixed genders, different, nationalities, meeting at one table and then doing it on a regular basis. And then not only that, but people who just don't come from, nerdy or kind of geeky backgrounds as well, who decide to pick it up and try it for the first time, and they don't want to necessarily catch you like in the locker room after school and beat you up because you're a goofy kid or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, you run. The thing is, it's so interesting hearing Nasser's perspective as well, because of that generation gap, right? So two things that I kind of draw stark contrast in terms of my personal experience versus his. And the first is like the question of inclusivity, right? So D&D was not the cool kids' game when I was playing.
Yeah.
It was not the cool kids' game. Like, like even here, it was kind of like, are you guys crazy? Are you insane? I mean, I still vividly remember this one. We were at a public bus stop, basically. We were at a bus stop of some friends of mine, and I was quiet. And they were sitting there yakking away about the encounter that we'd had the day before, where they were fighting these giant spiders and how one of the guys got poisoned. And they were referring to themselves in the first person. I got poisoned. He hit the spider bit him. And I remember the look on this slightly more senior gentleman's face. And he was looking at them like they were madmen. He was looking at all of us like we were absolutely like loopy, right? Like off our rockers. And he snapped. He's like, what is wrong with you? To the effect of course, it was in Arabic, but to the effect of, it's like, basically, what are you guys smoking? What are you on? Saying, are you crazy? Is something wrong with you? Go see a doctor, or like even a witch doctor, someone like, read spells or whatever, prayers on you and, exorcise the evil out of your mad minds. So it's a bit loopy, so for me, the question of inclusivity is one of who is willing to give it a shot. Which brings me actually to the second thing that I draw sharp contrast with Nasser's experience, which is reference material. So today, if people are drawing, if new players in the Middle East are drawing inspiration from, let's call it the popular culture that they consume and the media that they consume. And so they're, drawing influences, say, from the movies they watch, or like, the anime that they watch, or TV shows that they watch and things like that. I say more power to them. There's a place for it, right? But in the 80s, in the 90s, in Bahrain, forget it, man. Like, there was no Lord of the Rings movies to carry us through or whatever. If you were not someone who was interested in picking up a book and reading it, there's the chances are you did not have a fantasy background. And so there were really only two ways that you could kind of accumulate players that were interested in going on your little, sort of crazy journey, if you will, right? And that was either that they come from the same kind of literary or similar literary background that you do. They read the same types of material that you do, or they just have a general interest in stories like you do. Or, you kind of had to sucker them in and let the game speak for itself. It's like, come on and try it out, and let the game speak for itself. And I'll tell you this. I think the most wonderful thing about collaborative storytelling, especially through the medium of tabletop role-playing games, they leave a visceral mark on people. Like, I kid you not, like over some of the campaigns that I've run, I've had two people, true stories, mind you, okay? Two guys I know cut their honeymoons short to catch the end of two different campaigns. These two guys don't know each other, but both of them clipped the tail end of their honeymoons to come back to make it for the finale of a campaign. And they're still married to this day. I think this speaks more for their wives actually than it does them.
That's dangerous territory, right there.
Right. But it's happened, and to be able to say that, like, to me, just as a case study on human behavior, right, or human nature, let's just say, like, wow. That's all I can say. Like, wow, it mattered to them that much. People have cut their summer holidays short to come back, to fly back into Bahrain to catch up with the games. I've seen grown men cry at the loss of a character that they've been developing for 3 to 5 years, and they, as players, they graciously accept that in the story that character died well, if you will, but the emotional impact that it had on them, it's like they lost somebody that they really knew. They lost a friend. They lost somebody who was near and dear to them. It had that same emotional impact. Now, I'm sure that that's not something that's unique to this part of the world. I'm sure that anybody who has played or run tabletop role-playing games has at some point encountered like this this all too human emotional reaction to this sort of process of storytelling through verisimilitude, right? And it's absolutely endearing. At my table, people have met and they are married today. Their characters married in game, and then they married outside of the game as well. And to be able to say that, you know, like we still joke about it. I think, you know, their kid's going to call me Uncle Strahd. You know, I'm pretty sure that that's going to happen.
How much do you think the way a player plays their character is revealing of their innermost personality? So, for example, I ran a game of Shadowrun for a while, and I had one. And Shadowrun's a game where, you know, you're supposed to be sneaky corporate, you know, espionage, and it can be gunfights and crazy boardroom brawls, and but I had a player who he sat down and he's like, you know, I just want to play a pacifist. And that's the way he was. Like he was a gentle person in life. And even when we play D&D or we would play Shadowrun, even, it was all about, you know, he did not like violence. And so, you know, I'm really curious, you know, how much because what I've noticed, having run games for forever, for 40 years running games, is that people generally fall into the same style of gameplay regardless of what they're playing. And I'm interested in knowing what you think of that. You know, like
I lean towards that it is both very telling of who the person is. The way they play is very telling of who they are. And so both that, and if they are open enough to the experience and to actually try putting on different hats, figuratively speaking, I think it can be very telling of who they can be. And I stand by that very strongly, because I've seen this happen across about 3 generations of gamers here in the Middle East. And I'll tell you this, there are guys my senior in age that started playing, you know, back in the heyday, basically. And I ran games for them, and or they had been running games themselves, but we all were playing it around the same time. And they kind of took the notion of fake it till you make it to that next level. They have become very high-powered, successful sort of career people, corporate people, very senior today. But they were that introverted, bookworm, little geeky kid back in the you know, in the 80s. And they're like, but when I'm in that corporate room and I have to present to a board of directors, or when I'm sitting in front of that high profile client, I'm not just me. I'm that character that changed the world, that, you know, defeated the big bad, that could, you know, that created miracles, basically, that did wondrous and amazing things. I'm that person. You know what I mean? And it's not, there's no sort of like detachment from reality either in any of this, by the way, right? The person isn't being literal, but it's not just one person, it's many people, you know. I say to a degree, myself included. Like, I think it's very difficult to say that some of the skills you learn from tabletop role-playing games do spill over into real life. And, you know, I'm probably one of the most sociable introverts you'll ever meet, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, believe me, I much prefer my time with you know, books than I do people, right? But at the same time, I'm not like necessarily antisocial or anything like that. But I took a lot of those skills with me into my job and into my career and into my relationships with other people as well, platonic or romantic, you name it, right? And these people, you know, when this one specific person, Gavin, like, I remember he said that, you know, he said, I'm not just Gavin, I'm also that guy or those characters that I played. So if those characters did wondrous things, well, I came up with those wondrous things for them to do. So why should my life be any different? And he's just got this shield in front of him that sort of is drawn from that sort of some of that the best of him, if you will, and he can bring it forward. And I think that's what tabletop role-playing games at their core kind of do to the people. One, when you play, your true nature or who you are is inevitable. It's inevitable that it's going to come out. But you will also see other people for who they are and other people for who they could be. And I think that's the other thing that's also important to take into account, that the characters, I think to many players, at least perhaps in an idealized way, but this is not a sort of a romanticized notion. I've really seen this happen. This is real. Is that people kind of bring the best of themselves forward through their characters as well, or the most creative of themselves, or the most pent up things kind of within them, you know what I'm saying? And they kind of bring it up through their characters and express those characters. And the thing is, this is to speak simply for people and their personalities, if you will, and how they kind of crop up in the game. But let's also not forget that, you know, our roles as dungeon masters or as, you know, hosts, basically people that are hosting a table, because you're not just a passive participant in the game, right? You're running the game, but at the same time, these people at your table are your guests, and you're responsible for their enjoyment and for their, you know, their mental well-being. And, you know, some of them might not know each other, right? And so, like, you invite people to a dinner party, you know, you're gonna figure out a way to get your guests to interact and things like. Well, the D&D table is no different, is the way I see it. You are a host as well as a DM, right? And it's kind of amazing because you'll see people kind of learn from each other, and behavior will start to mimic. And so when you kind of manage people's expectations early on, get people aligned in terms of, you know, where they want to get to in a game and how you want to run it. You're very clear about what's on the table, what's off the table, you know, making sure that people are comfortable and that they feel welcomed and that they feel safe, that they can talk about things, and you know when to completely say, all right, stop, let's put the, you know, role playing aside, snap back to reality, remember that we're all people, we're all friends, you know, saying you diffuse tension, and things like that. You know, when you can do stuff like that, those are life skills. Those are actually, well, I would call them management skills, if you will, right? Being able to manage your table. And they're things that you pick up mainly through experience, but I think they come from this place of, I genuinely want people to be well at my table and have a great time and, you know, be the best versions of themselves for that story that we are telling together. And so I do have this tendency to ramble on a bit, Matt. I apologize, but
with you, I am really bad about that. So,
excuse me.
And
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Sure.
I got a question for Rachel, Nasser, Matt. I guess that Sam already touched on the topic, but for your characters, are they typically so close to your actual personalities? And it sounds like maybe you kind of bring out their traits in the real world as a point of charisma, possibly, like, to, like, I don't know, do they bring you courage in the real world?
Yeah, actually, when you were talking about that, I was just thinking of a conversation that I had with a friend who we were playing in a game together, and normally, like in real life, she's pretty quiet and introverted and doesn't like to talk a lot, but the character she makes is just like, you know, she is not afraid to step up and be like, stop it right now. No is her catchphrase we always joke about. And she recently got promoted at her job and was going through a lot of like weird changes and times she had to be assertive. And I was always, the character's name was Hildy, and I always was joking with her, channel Hildy, just, you know, you could do it. Like, I've seen you be super assertive in the game. And so she was, you know, she said she did. She channeled Hildy, and she kind of put on that persona that she knew she could do, and it really helped her in her job. And I agree. I mean, I do that too. I think when I was younger and first starting out, I played characters that were just like me and really no different. But once you do that a couple games, it gets kind of old, and you're like, I want to try something else. So like, I'm very extroverted. Recently, I've been playing introverts, and that is fun because I didn't even understand introverts until I played one. And my husband's an introvert, like an extreme introvert. And after I started playing a very introverted character, I'd come up to him after sessions and be like, I get why you do that now. Like, I totally understand. And I feel like you can explore kind of different people's headspaces and perspectives, and it helps you with empathy and getting understanding people more. And I think that helps you in the real world too, because then you kind of understand where people are coming from instead of constantly being confused as to why someone would act the way they do, because that's not what you would do, you know, or whatever. But
yeah, great.
Yeah, I do appreciate, by the way, just really fast, both of your perspectives just on like how you both got into gaming, because I feel like it is so different here because we have we had resources abound. Like, you know, fantasy has always been around. I've always been able to access it. Like, I played D&D when I was a kid. And I didn't even know it because of the Neverwinter Nights games that were based in 3.5, and like D&D was like an evil thing in my household. Like, you couldn't do it, but unknowingly it snuck in, and I was playing since I was like 10 anyway because of that computer game. And so it's really interesting to, you know, limited resources and having to sort of piece it together versus it's literally all around so much it saturates into your environment and you don't even know it. So it's really interesting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
What about you, Nasser? How much has gameplay affected your personality and how you approach life?
I think I'm going to go back to the first time I went behind the screen. And here I am running for my like as a player, I was okay. Like, I've never had a problem being a player. But now I'm DMing for the first time, and I was DMing for my cousin and 2 of his friends. And at that moment, I was I was very nervous. I was like, okay, I've memorized this a million times and I know what to do, but I'm freezing. So I made up excuses to not to prolong the whole thing before I start the game. But then once I started, that was a point where you broke the ice. You're no longer afraid. And then the more I ran games, I felt that gave me confidence. Like, let's say if you took the same person and brought him here to the channel and said talk, I might be quiet the whole time, but right now I'm talking. This is an effective D&D. It gives you that confidence to go out and you know, talk in a channel, and I've done a lot of that over the last 2 years. So this is one of the points. Another point I'm going to talk about from a DM's perspective. When I get new players, right, I can read them like a book when they sit on the table by how they play. Like, I can tell, oh, this guy is a selfish player. I have to talk to him out of the game, that then explain to him that this is a collaborative role-playing game. Or this guy is like and I know this, and I know from the beginning that I'm going to play with this person and I'm not going to play with this person based on what I see. And if this person wants to develop, I'll have a talk with them. Like, you want to get better at role playing, we can talk about it. If you don't want, I don't think I'm the GM for you. You might want to play with that GM. He's more into combat, warrior style. So you start to develop this thing when you run a lot of players. And I was running like 5 to 6 games a week because I was starting the community. So there were no DMs at the time. So I see a lot of players, and you see a lot of personalities. You see a lot of, like what Matt said and everybody said, a lot of their like real personality seeps into their characters because they're all new players. And it's like Rachel said, right in the beginning, you start playing yourself and then you start to develop it. I saw a lot of that. And then, so once I sit in a table, if there's new players, I know, like, okay, I know what this guy's, and I'm not categorizing people. It's just like how it's just players. And then
you can sense it. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a thing
for me
on that point.
Yeah, for me, my role-playing games, at least role-playing games in every way, shape, and form shaped the person I am today and actually put me where I'm at today. Because in the 70s, I struggled with learning disabilities. I had dyslexia, really struggled with reading. I would get these headaches, which I learned later was something else. And transposing numbers and letters. It was just a disaster. And in the 70s, there were no services, for that sort of thing. It was sink or swim for a lot of kids. And we were in a small town, so it's probably made it even worse. And you mentioned finding your gaming fix at a grocery store, or finding the inspiration at a grocery store. For me, we had a hardware store that was carrying TSR products.
Nice.
And so my brother actually found the books there, and he would include me in on the games. But my brother and my parents, they were like, you know what, if you want to play this game, you need to sit down and learn it and read these books. And, and in the early 80s, then there were some services through the hospital that started opening up for learning disabilities. But gaming had already got its hook in me through the art. And, if I wanted to play, I had to learn how to do it on my own. And so, I started working through these books, and it was exhausting. I can remember being exhausted trying to read some of these books, especially the first edition books. Holy moly. First edition books were, Gary Gygax came from a wargaming background, and it showed, and it was confusing as all get out. But the more you play, the more you get the swing of things, So, when I was getting these services at the hospital, then they were like, you know what, he needs to go find a trade. Don't even send him to college. Told my parents that. And the best way to motivate me is to tell me I can't do something. And I mean, like today I got 3 collegiate degrees, and I owe a lot of that to gaming, because without those books and without that desire to want to participate, I don't think I would have fought my way through, like, to be able to read as well as I could have. And who knows where that would have landed me, certainly not where I am today. I think it's a complete shift. So, and like Nasser said, it's a morale booster. Once you start GMing in front of people, especially people you don't know, you can, your public speaking, your ability to address people, your ability to read people, it starts to grow. And now I can talk to anyone. I don't care, so.
I think I'd like to add something to that. Actually, I think beyond just sort of how, let's call them like, the benefits that you can derive from tabletop role-playing games and storytelling and just engaging at the table, beyond kind of like the self-growth that you kind of have in terms of your social or communication skills, I found that it really piqued my curiosity. I mean, my desire and interest to know things, because, just sort of skyrocketed as a result of fantasy, or it actually just tabletop role-playing games in general, whatever the genre. Like I found, I wanted to know how, about the different histories of the world, for example, right? I wanted to know more about their mythologies and, why did, not only like what gods did they worship and what cultural practices they have, but why as well. And, plus. Like I found that I just, you kind of take that and you transpose it over other areas, right? So, I never did well in school because of my, I have issues with attention, right? So the thing is, and I never was properly diagnosed with ADHD until like as little as 5 years ago. I was 40 when I got diagnosed with ADHD. And so I could never quite explain why I could hyper focus on one thing and just sort of really dig deep and, to the exclusion of everything else, or just never be able to focus on any one thing at any time. So it's really important for me to kind of jump from one activity and one task to another and things like that. And so what I found was that my interest in tabletop gaming and role-playing games and, just the fantasy genre and history in general, that kind of kept me anchored. It was a very kind of good way to let my mind kind of meander and do what it does the way it's wired to, as opposed to resisting it. And that's to just explore and learn a little bit about a lot of things. And then over time, you kind of accumulate this library of, well, now I actually know a lot about a lot of different things and whatever, but you do sacrifice specializing in anything, if you will, right? Or maybe you just become a more well-rounded specialist. I don't know. But the point is that the development is not just in social skills, but it's actually in to me anyway, it's been in kind of my own cognitive skills, right? So my ability to get focused in a game, my ability to read, like, well, rather to pivot in any given moment and react to my players. So, I mean, like, you know, what was that old joke? You know, if you want to make God laugh, tell him you've got a plan. It's the absolute same thing, you know, when you plan a D&D game. You know what I'm saying? Like, your players are going to do something, and you're, as a DM, it's more important that you know how to pivot and respond to that, you know, without yourself, you know, getting derailed or just losing kind of your confidence or steam, and keeping the game kind of going, right? And all that comes again with practice, but those are amazing skills to kind of have, because I want you to imagine being able to pivot at life, whatever curve gets thrown at you, because you've already gone through the you know, you've jumped through the mental hoops already. You've done your boot camp. You know what I'm saying? You're kind of ready for the real world, if you will, right? And so that's where I would, at my age now, you know, I turned 45 a few days ago, last week, I think. But
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
thank you.
Birthday, huh?
Thanks a lot, guys. But yeah, I mean, at, you know, at 45, you know, I do think of things in those terms. It's in terms like, and what I mean by those terms is, you know, where tabletop gaming could take a young person 20 years down the line. You know what I'm saying? Because the cognitive skills that you'll pick up, the personal growth skills that you'll pick up, your ability, the emotional intelligence that you'll pick up, you know what I'm saying? These are valuable things for life in general. And, you know, I'm not married and don't have kids, but like, I'm sure people who do have legacy in you know, a blood legacy, those are the things that you want to impart to them as well. You see what I mean? Like, you know, I might not be married and not have kids, but I keep telling my family, like, my books, those collectibles back there, those are things that I would love someone to inherit from me, somebody like my own blood to inherit from me, somebody who takes the same amount of joy that I took from them when I got them, and as an adult trying to fill in the gaps, you know what I'm saying, of the books that I never had growing up because I just couldn't find them, you know what I mean? And so they mean a lot to me, and, you know, absent that, and I said, bury them with me. That's what's going to happen. You're going to bury them with me. They're coming with me, because if they can't be appreciated, then they shouldn't be with anybody. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of the point. But, you know, jokes aside, there's a lot of growth to be had from playing tabletop role-playing games that's translatable to the real world. And it's one of the other reasons that I love it. I'm my own test subject in this matter, you know what I mean? And I'm sure Matt agrees as well. I mean, if you had to overcome any kind of, let's call it, cognitive challenge, you know what I'm saying, during a time where help was not even readily available to diagnose a situation, let alone assist you with kind of working through it, you know what I'm saying? And then it takes something as simple as the joy of tabletop role-playing games to help you make a little bit more sense of your life and give you those training wheels to be able to function a little better at life. My God, you know, I would say that's a little miracle neatly packaged between two book covers, you know what I'm saying, and a bunch of dice. So that's how I look at it, honestly, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rachel touched on something earlier that I think is interesting, because it was a really, really big deal in the States in the 80s and 90s. And that was the evilness of role-playing games.
Satanic Panic.
Yeah. So my own experience was my mom's boss. I had been borrowing her car to drive out to a place where all of our friends would meet. It was called the Clubhouse, and it was just like this abandoned house, I guess, that we would set up in. And I left all my stuff in the backseat of her car, and her boss coming out to his car saw it all. And he felt the need that you know what, we're going to have a sit down and talk about how dangerous this is. And it's the gateway to demonic possession. And I mean, it was a big deal. There was every time that there was a kid who happened to play D&D and also commit suicide, it was always, no matter what, attributed to the game, you know. And you know, the TV show 60 Minutes ran an episode on it, and you know, it was in the media. Have you guys experienced anything like that in Bahrain?
Satanic Panic. I did, but not with tabletop role-playing games, of course. It's just by virtue of the music that I listened to. Heavy metal got a lot more flack than what he called the D&D. There were too few players, you know. So, and again, you know, like you'd never like see something about like tabletop fancy role-playing games, you know, in the news or in any kind of publication in the region at the time. Like I find it interesting that the closest thing to a Satanic Panic, and mind you, it's kind of like the hiccup of Satanic Panic. I was like, it literally lasted that long, like a microsecond, kind of, you know, dissipated in the wind. Was actually it kind of in the 2000s when it started picking up a little bit, not the 2000s, rather the 2010s, when it started picking up a bit of steam and more people started getting exposed to it. And then all those people that, you know, saw that article that came out in the 70s said, hey, wait a minute, what if this makes like devil worshipping heathens out of our kids and stuff like that? And people were like, dude, shut up. That makes no sense. You know what I mean? And it kind of blew over, you know, it kind of blew over. And yet that same mindset does not exist for heavy metal. I'd say to this day, I mean, that was part of my sort of agenda with sort of playing or hosting a rock show or heavy metal show on Radio Bahrain. And it was kind of to demystify it, right? The idea was to kind of say like, hey, you know, it's actually a very positive thing and it's for everybody and it's an inclusive thing and it's, you know, it's not as bad as you might think it is. But the same problem with tabletop role-playing games, no, it was like the worst it ever got, I would liken to a burp in the wind. You know what I'm saying? It smelled bad at the time, and then it kind of blew over, and we all forgot about it. You know,
Did you ever take pause, like if my dad finds out, or anything like that, or was it?
No. My parents were extremely happy that my face was buried in books, you know, in art, or that when I was hanging out with my friends, we weren't like, you know, doing stuff that they couldn't tell. You know, there was no ambiguity, right? We were around a table rolling dice and talking crazy as far as our parents were concerned.
I think Nasser had a point there.
Yeah, on Ham's point, in general, it's like that. I watch Game of Thrones with my dad. So it's kind of, so we watch a lot of fantasy stuff, medieval fantasy stuff and series, and you know, the Excalibur. I always watch that stuff with my dad. So there was one incident where I was running a game in the local tabletop cafe. And it happened that I was wearing a black t-shirt, which is the exact same one, but a different one. It's a Berserk t-shirt, it's an anime. Mm-hmm. And another player was wearing a black Star Wars t-shirt. And everybody, it had just happened to be by coincidence that all of us that day were wearing black t-shirts.
Ooh.
And there was a parent dropping one of his, dropping his son to come and play with us. So I looked at the parent and I saw the look on his face. And then his kid came in and he joined the game, and he was a teenager, I think about 16 years of age. And once he finished the game, he had fun. He sends me a message. The kid sends me a message like the next day. Are you guys a cult? Are you Satanists? I said, why? You all were wearing black. I said, it just happened by coincidence that we were wearing black. Like, you can see the t-shirt. One guy was wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. It has nothing. It just happened by coincidence that we were wearing black. So I think that was the only, I wouldn't call that a satanic panic. I would call that a parent panic.
Yeah.
I think people in this region anyway do have a problem with the color black. Like, not a problem as such, but there's a connotation kind of to it, like an implicit kind of nefariousness to being dressed in black. Like, over here people tend to dress in very light colors as well because of the heat and things like that, right? I mean, our sun will cook you alive. But so if you're in black and stuff like that, despite that, what do you call it? There must be something wrong with you. But no, I wouldn't say it was to the degree and severity that it probably happened over there. Like we never really had a satanic panic or anything like that.
And it looks like it never developed either because, you know, I would say it still happens here now, often depending on what circles you're in. Because even like with Mark and I, Mark is a youth pastor, so like we work with teenagers all the time, and we've always well, actually we had to have a discussion when he got hired, being like, do we tell people we play D&D, or do we just kind of keep it under the radar because, you know, we're gonna have like potential circles of different parents, especially homeschooling parents or parents that are more on like the, you know, that just kind of think that in that direction more. You know, they might pull their kids out of youth group if they're too, you know, if they feel like our judgment is off or whatever. So I think it, like as it's gone on, it's gotten less and less, but it is weird how like it still's there. Like, but I'm glad at least with this, it was only a little bit for you guys and not too much.
You know what, Rachel, though, you touched on a very interesting point that I think is a common denominator, actually. I think by virtue of scale, I think maybe, you know, because we're such a tiny country versus say, like if we were to take the United States as a whole, basically, right? Like, you know, Bahrain is like what, a small town? You know, somewhere in terms of the population, right? Yeah. So just by virtue of scale, I think, you know, it's inevitable that you're not going to see that much of, and also proximity, right? We're quite far away. But if you take a moment to think about like, well, why do people react in such a fearful or apprehensive way towards something like this? And it's mainly because of two things, you know, to my mind, right? And again, I'm not like a psychologist or whatever, but just, you know, the way I see it is, one, it's something that they don't understand.
Yep.
And two, it's something that visually, when they see it, is jarring. It creates some kind of dissonance with their understanding of the world and behavior in the world, right? And the truth is, that is something universal. I don't think that's actually something that is necessarily, that reaction is universal.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
And how that reaction is expressed is probably going to be more nuanced depending on where you're at or what circles you're with, as you rightfully said. And the way I see it is, I'm gonna try and draw a parallel from radio here and music to tabletop role-playing games, right? Because again, we didn't experience the panic as such as regards tabletop role-playing games. But the idea is that when somebody reacts to me, to the way I dress, or to the way, you know, to my choice of language even, or whatever it might be, the best thing to do is not to shirk, despite my nature to want to, because I'm an introvert. I don't necessarily want confrontation, right? But what I find is that a handshake and a smile and allowing questions to come my way, you know what I'm saying? And being very clear with my answers and without being antagonizing.
Yep.
And also being fearless and being able to counter calmly anything that's put forward, and to help kind of things get framed as questions directed to me, as opposed to accusations leveled at me. And again, those are kind of important things, because when you start having that discussion, then you can start working your way towards, let's agree to disagree at the worst case scenario, or let me actually help you understand and bridge that gap, so there's less of a dissonance in your head about what it is that we do, and I'm not as threatening to you anymore. And I think that is the harder path to take. You know what I'm saying? That's the harder thing to kind of do. And yet, in a way, I saw it as a very necessary thing to do. Like, what prompted me to start doing it with radio and with heavy metal here in Bahrain is because I was sick and tired of seeing metal shows get canceled. I was sick and tired of seeing guys get arrested and detained because of the T-shirt they were wearing. You know what I'm saying? And things like that. It's and it sounds like it's very oppressive and what have you. It's not. Of course, I say detained. I mean they get held for a few hours and then let go because there's no case. You know what I'm saying? And you know, my personal beliefs here. You know, I don't like things like anti-blasphemy laws. They don't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying? And things like that, right? Just to my mind, I think that these things should be separate. When a person's spirituality should not be hard-coded into a country's constitution, right? But again, just personal beliefs. So there were very, let's call them on the ground reasons that prompted me to kind of say, well, you know what? I want to advocate for my people, for the group, this subculture that I represent, right? Because it matters to me. And so I did exactly that, and that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. Right up until the show got canceled a few weeks ago.
No.
It was fun while it lasted, but
Yeah.
So you'll have a return.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what made you know, that's the same reason why when, you know, we both did go into like working within a church, we made the decision like we're not going to hide it because first of all, that's hiding a big part of ourselves and then it feels hypocritical. And second, like, yeah, let's kind of get rid of some of the stigmatism here and like actually show like, because most of I don't know if it's like this for metal where you guys are, but most of the scary articles that are written, when you read them, you're like, that's not how it is. Like, you know, they don't even know how, like for the D&D stuff. Yeah, you don't even know how D&D is run. Like, this isn't even remotely correct at all. And if they read the rule book, they would see it's like math and pretending. That's literally all it is. And it's not as like nefarious as you're making it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, conversations and being able to be open about it. And so, you know, if someone can look at you who's in more like a position of leadership and go, you know, they seem like a decent person and they're in this position of leadership and they play Dungeons and Dragons, like it makes you at least stop and think for a second to be like, maybe I was off on this, you know, or whatever. So it's been good to yeah, I agree, having very nice conversations with people and being willing to listen to their perspective, even if it's wrong, you know, and off of what the reality is, so you can kind of start guiding them into the, well, not quite. Let's redirect a little bit, you know.
Precisely. Yeah.
I know, Ashley, we were talking just the other day. You've never been in a position where anyone discouraged you basically from anything related to this stuff. So, you know, having any kind of roadblocks to you must still shock you that it's happening today. Yeah, I mean, as far as my background getting into the fantasy realm goes, it was at a very young age. I mean, probably around 10. I started playing Magic the Gathering when the game started because my dad played the game. So as far as like, you know, spooky fantasy realm and magic casting goes, my family's always been totally cool with that. My grandma, she has read Game of Thrones and whatnot. Yeah, and like even in like the Magic the Gathering community, I haven't experienced anything untowards like during tournaments and whatnot. Everyone's been pretty welcoming, even in the heavy metal community. I mean, I have like an Ensiferum shirt on underneath here, and that's most of my attire. I mean, sometimes I get weird looks, you know. My shirts have a lot of like sword wielding on them, but yeah, I haven't had any like negative experiences from friends or family or in the communities. So I've been pretty lucky as far as that goes, I suppose. That might be a good segue, because what are you listening to right now, actually? Like, I mean, not like this moment, but what is your current album of choice? Because I know you do a lot of vinyl. Yes, I actually just got a Blind Guardian CD this week.
Imaginations from the Other Side, their remastered CD. So I've been listening to that in my car. Mostly a lot of Blind Guardian lately.
She's always posting videos of just the turntable going around and the music.
Oh, yes.
That's cool.
Yeah, I have a pretty large collection, I suppose, of records and CDs. That's yeah.
I was taking a look at your Instagram and I saw you had like a nice little thrash collection in there. I saw Exodus is Bonded by Blood and
Yeah.
was it Exciter or Exumer? I can't remember. Exciter or Exciter. No, they're both good bands.
Oh.
No, awesome. I was like, yeah. This person knows what they're talking about. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, while we're on the topic of metal, yeah, I suppose like death metal, folk metal, and power metal are like my main areas of interest. So, what about you guys?
Oh God. Okay. Favorite? I would probably say anything that's kind of like progressive infusion, but like so I really like bands like old school bands like Cynic and Atheist. They were phenomenal bands, but they still are phenomenal bands. Of course, Death, the band Death is still one of my all-time favorites. But in terms of genres, I still really do like my thrash, punk, and hardcore and crossover. I really love that genre. I still like what do you call it? And grindcore for that matter. I love death metal as well. I love progressive death metal, technical death metal. But you name it. I mean, there's you should ask me what I don't like. It's a much shorter list. What do you call it?
Understood.
It's interesting how many players I know are also huge music fans, and it seems to go together, music and role-playing games.
They're so
Yeah, for me, when I listen to music, I like to envision some sort of scene, and something it may relate to the lyrics or it may relate to the actual instrumentals. But when I listen to music, and I'm not talking about like music in the background while I'm working, I'm like, when I sit and listen to music, I like to just really envision something to go along with it. I find, at least the people I brought this up with, that there's kind of a similarity there between people who really like to activate their imaginations and doing some things similar.
I think that actually how Nasser, when you were saying how so many of the kids that are getting into D&D now are into anime, I think that's a huge thing, because if you watch like an anime intro, right? Like, especially like an anime where everyone is like fighting each other, like that's D&D right there. And I will tell you that like with a really good song for a Japanese anime intro combined with fighting, like that's how I picture D&D in my head now most of the time. Or like if I find a good song, like I almost imagine anime intros of like all our D&D party, and it's so fun now. But I agree, like music definitely activates the imagination with D&D in your party.
Does a lot. Adding to that point, a few of the game designers that I'm friends with, the most well-known person is Robert Schwab. I think one of the people who worked on 5th edition and 4th edition, a lot of stuff. Every week or every few days, he's got a playlist that he puts on Facebook of stuff that he listens to while he's working on his next project in gaming. So, and he's not the only one. There's a few of them, but I think he's the most well-known out of the bunch. But yeah, so music does, it does something, just makes you go somewhere when you're trying to write or you're trying to think of something.
But even that kind of like, even that sort of reaction, there's this, it shoots off these things in your brain, right? Like, okay, how many times have you walked into, litmus test right here, how many times have you walked into a hobby store of some kind, seen a book and bought it by virtue of its cover only?
A lot.
Right? Now, swap book with metal album cover.
Same.
You see my point? There's something in there, like it's like just right there. I thought, but you look at this album cover, you're like, this looks amazing. I have no idea who these guys are or what kind of music they play or whatever, but this looks absolutely outstanding. Or just take a look at any Iron Maiden cover from back in the day, right?
It's the art.
The art sucks you in. It just completely sucks you in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Morkborg, or Morborg, the Swedish RPG. Why did it win an award? It looks like a metal
it's like a doom sludge metal kind of apologist role-playing game, you know.
It's a very dark game.
Yeah, so
but it won an award for it.
Rachel, you're like 4 minutes late right now, but before you go, do you have any other stories you wish to share? Are you good?
About anything or?
Yeah, about anything.
I don't know.
And especially projects you're working on or anything.
I mean, I would say, yeah, when it just comes to projects, my biggest thing right now is what I'm working on with my husband, which is we're streaming a homebrew D&D game, and I do art with it. So I draw all the NPCs and stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it could be anything. I do follow, and I know like every single one of her characters, if you follow her Instagram feed, has a distinct personality, and she will relate like conversations from their games into the art, and you can see like in the little text portion, what's you could get kind of follow what's going on to a degree in their game. So
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, I definitely like to do that. I've been a little quiet on Instagram lately, but I do want to start doing that again, where just kind of rehashing the drama. So it's a good time.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for coming, Rachel. I wish you could stay longer, but Rachel's going to be hopping in with Ashley and I on future episodes, and I'm really excited. We're going to have one on just general game mastering, from theater of the mind all the way up to full-blown miniatures and everything, and how-tos and what not to do's, and that's coming up. I think like that one will probably be coming out like the end of February, so yeah, it's going to be a little while. I know you were tied up, Rachel, so but thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, hey, it was really nice to talk to you guys and meet you all and hear your perspectives. I loved it.
Pleasure to meet you too, Rachel.
Pleasure to meet you too. Great to hear from you, Rachel.
What? Sorry?
It was great to hear from you, Rachel.
Yeah, you too. Sorry. All right, I'll see you guys later.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so let's talk about Al-Qadim. I know, and just a little preface. Back in the day, in the TSR days, they would, I think Oriental Adventures is a good example. We're not really going to go down that rabbit hole because I think that's been explored by a number of people. Some people love it, some people hate it, for kind of merging all the different Asian cultures to release a single source book. But in that same vein, Al-Qadim kind of merged a bunch of different cultures from the Middle East to create a single, and I think what you described it as kind of Alibaba setting, if you will. So how do you feel about the setting? And I have some input on it myself, and I guess it relates back to any merging of cultures, like, because I believe TSR also had kind of a Mesoamerican setting that just didn't take off.
Mastica, I think it was called, or something like that. I think, yeah.
So Nasser, what do you think? How much did you explore?
I haven't read much into it, but a friend of mine has a channel, and he does a lot of reading into it and explains what's wrong with it culturally or whatever. And I don't know, from what I've seen, and I understand this point, like when it was written back in the day, you didn't have any Wikipedia, you didn't have the power of the internet, so they had to research a lot of this stuff. The internet wasn't what it was now. Like, it's not how it is now. So they didn't have that much resources. So I can understand that point completely. And it doesn't bother, like, I can totally understand it. I feel it's like a mix of Arabic, a little bit, you've got Persian there, you've got a little bit of Indian there. That's how I felt from it. Now, does it, like, am I bothered by it? I excuse them for it, because at the time, like, they didn't have the resources. Is it, if somebody comes and says, is it Arabic? I would say no. Is it Middle Eastern? Yeah, I can say it's Middle Eastern.
I always got the impression that they were trying to capture the 7 voyages of Sinbad in a box.
One more thing I want to add. The 1001 Nights is not Arabic.
Correct.
Yes, I don't know if it came from India, Ham, or is it Persia?
No, it was no. Actually, hold on. No, I thought you were referring to something else. Actually, so 1001 Nights is a European work of fiction. So basically, it's the author. I can't remember, was he Russian? Was he French? I can't remember to save my life right now. But I'm sure a quick Google search can reveal the who's who actually wrote 1001 Nights. But the idea, to my understanding, is that it is a kind of a Eurocentric view of what the Middle East, of what the exotic Near East was like, and it leaned a lot on folklore from well, I guess you can kind of call it like Asia Minor, maybe, like, basically what is today Iran, or back then Persia, and basically the
India. There's a lot of Indian.
Exactly. Exactly. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of India, a little bit of Iran, a little bit of where Iraq is as well, or was back then. So it leaned on a little bit of that stuff. But you have to understand that it's a romanticized interpretation of those cultures. You know what I'm saying? And not even those cultures, really. What it is its own culture. I think the reason you'll find a lot of Arabs and Middle Easterners do not get offended as such by, let's say, but any kind of world building that surrounds the 1001 Nights mythos is because it's not necessarily one culture's. It's already a potpourri of ideas, and it's become its own thing. And over time, those stories have actually, worked their way into people's into people's affections. You know what I'm saying? Like, we love the stories of Shahrazad, and we love the stories of Aladdin, and we love the stories of Ali Baba, whatever, but they're not our culture as such. They're kind of this it's like you watch a movie and you see, like, when they show you a harem of some sheikh's harem, whatever, and you see these women, scantily clad in these diaphanous kind of veils and what have you. I mean, how kitsch is that? You know what I'm saying? But, like, still, nonetheless, you know what I mean? It feeds more to a stereotype that you can kind of tongue-in-cheek go, yeah, all right, I get where it's coming from. You know what I'm saying? But it's not necessarily offensive as such, because it's not, well, like I said, it's not borrowing from something that's actually real. It's borrowing from Eurofiction, you know what I mean? That we've become fond of as well, in a way, right? So it's, on that level, I guess, that there's a certain context that has to be taken into account when looking at it, right?
Yeah, so I know that I've seen quite a few people who Asian Americans, there's some small subculture, and I shouldn't say subculture, that's the wrong word. There's a population of Asian Americans who hate Oriental adventures. And then there's some, and I talk to people from all over the globe via Instagram. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. But I talk to people from all over, and it seems like there are Asian Americans who hate Oriental adventures, and then but when I speak to like players in Japan or other Asian countries, and they're just like, I like it, you know. And maybe this will get more into the topic we're going to talk about later, but it definitely seems like, and I don't know if you've encountered any kind of like Arabic Americans who have had opinions about Al-Qadim versus the people who actually live in the Middle East.
I have, if I may, what do you call it? So yes, I actually have several Arab American friends, and some of them played Al-Qadim, even played it with me back in the heyday. And the truth is, this is anecdotal, right? What I'm about to say is very anecdotal. I could not substantiate it, and you know, outside of my own experience, basically, right? But I find that younger players are more vocal about cultural insensitivities than the older players are. So the guys that are kind of closer to my generation, you know, they took it for what it was, and they, you know, they seem to just play it. Like there's no discussion. You know what I mean? Like it's not a topic of discussion. It's yet another, you know, setting that we can play in and have fun in, right? But it seems that the younger players, they are a bit more switched on to what I would say today are sensitivities that maybe, like, you know, back in my time were not necessarily going to be, I'm not going to say that they're not issues, that obviously, you know, an issue is an issue, right? But perhaps it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of our minds that it would become a topic of conversation that we would then transpose onto our gaming experience, which we held as something completely separate, if you will, right? So, you know, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a politicization of gaming or whatever, but actually, I'm not going to say that. That's a very clumsy and poorly phrased.
Cultural issues.
We never took it serious.
You know, that's the thing. It's you know, yeah, to Nasser's point, it's like, you know, what do you take it seriously? I mean, when do you separate a cultural, let's say, grievance, for want of a better word, from a gaming experience? You know what I'm saying? And do they fundamentally go hand in hand? Should they? You know, so younger people, I find, are more interested in debating these nuances, whereas, you know, guys kind of like from my age group are kind of like, yeah, happy to talk about them, but not during game time. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of, it's the difference in approach that I've seen with my kind of gaming circles, if you will, right? So, like I said, anecdotal, not necessarily representative of reality, but you know, the broader sort of experience, but not reality.
I don't think there's been any kind of scientific research done on anything, but yeah, I definitely feel like, and again, if I feel like there is more sensitivity today to issues. Like, for example, you know, if I were, and I find it interesting that European cultures aren't really pulled into that, because the earliest, like first ed D&D, OD&D, they were kind of a conglomeration of European cultures. So like the barbarian class, when it first came out in the Anarth Arcana in the early 80s, you know, that was a mishmash of Vikings and Germanic peoples, and you know, and then you have like the Paladin, which has French and English and a little bit of German in there. The Cavaliers the same way. And right down to the equipment and the weapons, and you know, they were in first ed, they were very particular about their pole arms, you know. So and I find it interesting that you know, if would there be a game at all if everybody who had a grievance stood up and said, this is wrong, you know, at that point, what do you do? It's because I think it's an interesting argument, because while I definitely could see somebody saying, you know, especially somebody who really has an investment in their culture, they love their people, and then they see this source book come along, and it's like a bastardization of a bunch of different things, and maybe some of what they really love about their culture wasn't included, and could get upset by that. But again, my generation is just like, hey, a new setting, like you said, hey, let's check this out, you know. And it's so it's very difficult for me to wrap my brain around why someone would get upset about it, you know. So you know, Nasser, do you have any thoughts on that, or Ashley?
I think because a lot of times, like the people who go out and attack something don't know how it was made. Like I said, it goes back to the point where they don't realize that the people that worked on those source books did not have the resources. They didn't have cultural consultants at the time, and the closest thing they could find was a university doctor, somebody with a PhD who probably did a article or two about Arabic culture and maybe knows Arabic, but I don't think he would
Hollywood.
Well,
I'd say more likely Hollywood than some guy with a PhD, you know?
And that's an interesting point, because I know, like with Oriental Adventures, the original book, in the foreword, they thank all the playtesters who are all Japanese. And again, they weren't the writers of the book, they were just the playtesters. But I think maybe that's just like in the early days of TSR, when the money started rolling in and they were, you know, lucrative and solvent. You know, they may have had a little bit more resources, but you're right. They didn't hire some expert from China to come over and tell them about this stuff. It was, you know, Gygax writing with his team.
Like a simple example, the Cobalt Press, you know the company, right? They do a lot of 5th edition products. I think their latest source book, I think the Southlands, right? They had some Arabic, I don't know, they had stuff from the Arabic culture in there. So they called up my friend, who's a cultural consultant for RPGs. And and they asked him, is this right? And to check it. And what he told me is like, to be honest, I didn't even have to check their stuff because they did everything right. And I think it's because of the huge amount of resources that is available now, as opposed to what it was back in the 90s, where, you know, you probably had a book that says, oh, these Arab people are like to do this and do that. They probably have a desert and they have a camel, but it's probably not accurate. So yeah, so I don't blame, I will not attack somebody for not having resources to do something. That's just me.
Yeah. So what do you think, Ashley? Do you think America, United States, has cultural, they call it the melting pot, but I think people kind of settle into their own groups. But do you think, I know I saw, you know, I think the Wheel of Time is now like an Amazon show, and I'm on like book 5 of the Wheel of Time as I slug along. And I saw an interview by Robert Jordan, who wrote the book, and he said, you know, I'm from the United States and we're a melting pot. So I felt like I had the privilege of dipping into all these different cultures that exist around the United States. And you can hear it in the name places and the people's names and the descriptions of weapons and whatnot, that he definitely dipped into a lot of different cultures to make his world unique. Do you think that's fair, Ashley, or do you think, what do you think? Do you think that he, being, you know, European descent, should he have stuck to that as a world?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if he's just taking inspiration from, you know, other cultures, I think that's perfectly fine as an author to be putting that in whatever context they seem fit. I mean, you know, I feel that authors should have the right to write as they see fit, as whatever they're imagining, wherever they're taking influence from, you know. I think that's good.
Another book that comes to mind was American Gods, that Neil Gaiman book, where that had gods from around the world, which I found really interesting because there were a lot I never even realized existed. And I think that's, you know, obviously Bahrain culture is now something I'm very interested in hearing about, which is why I implore you guys to write a source book, because I think that would be cool. But I like dipping into other cultures for my games, and I think like, and it comes back for a little suggestion for Ashley over here. When you're GMing, I think I saw article recently where they were like top 10 things a new GM should do, and it's one of them was have your world ready. Like, and I'm like, no, if you're brand new, you don't want a whole world ready. You want like a small town where the group starts and then you grow from there, you know. But once you do start ending up in different lands, you don't need to write a whole new world. You could say, hey, you see these Corinthian columns and marble building, and you could start using Greek names, and it'll immediately evoke a lot of imagery for people and it saves you a lot of work, you know. So yeah. But and I think that kind of segues into something you had asked me about, Ham, and that was how WotC is changing the lore of the game right now to fit, or to kind of adopt the changing sentiments of borrowing from cultures. Or most recently we found that article where, you know, they're changing a number of really trademark monsters, their lore, to reduce racism. And I'm not really sure how changing the background of a beholder or a mind flare will combat racism. But you know, I've seen people who have argued, you know, if you have a human culture and an elvish culture at war, that's a problem. That perpetuates racism. And I've seen people say, you know, I want a gritty world to exist in. I want a gritty world for my character. I want there to be a realistic world with elements of magic, right? And I think there's some people that relate to that more. But so what do you guys think about WotC's changes? And I know that there are a number of them, whether it's the new Strahd release where they rewrote Strahd. Of course, you have to buy that $100 thing to get it. And there's, and I think Nasser, you kind of commented that Witchlight and some of the recent books are much more toned down. So what do you guys think? Oh, Ashley. There she is.
There she is.
We've rearranged as a result.
I think my point of view is like, it's more of a, and this is how I see it. It's like, for me, it's more like, this is the company and they're looking at their consumers. Who's the largest group of consumers? It just happens to be that those consumers don't like this style, like want those changes. So the way I see it, this is a corporate company catering to what the larger, like the huge number of consumers are out there. That's one thing. And if you look at it, the design teams have changed since, if you look at if you go back to 2nd edition, 3rd edition, and then 4th edition, the design team isn't there anymore. Like, so you've got new people coming in. So of course you're going to get a surge of new ideas, people wanting to change, like bring in their own stuff. Some people want to even leave their own legacy on the game. And so that also has a factor in it. And I think the surveys that were done as well, a lot of people didn't like people who wanted to play demons. Oh, they're evil. They want those changes. Do I agree with the changes? Me being a person who's read the older like stuff. Like, here's the thing. I don't have to I don't agree with it, but it doesn't cause a problem for me because in my table, I will run it the way I want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is where, when I see people arguing about it, and that is the bottom line. People are going to run with it. So but you know, and when I see WotC say, hey, we're going to do this change to combat this social issue, whatever the social issue may be, I think to myself, you know, okay, we're going to change the orc to be, you know, and I think specifically they said they're not mindless killing machines anymore, and you know, and part of me says, you know, it's a game, and this particular game needs bad guys, you know, and that's the bread and butter of the game, is to confront the bad guys and take their stuff, right, and thwart their plans. But I also think it is going to be a tall order for them to make any change along, like, if their stated goal is to combat the social issue and they're going to do it through these steps. I think that I think that is kind of a very, very narrow mindset in terms of what they could be actually doing to make change, because one, if they're doing it to cater a group of people who already think that way, they're not changing minds, and they're just reinforcing minds, right? And two, there is decades of not only gaming materials but literary materials where, so say the orc, you know, anyone who reads Lord of the Rings, orcs are evil killing machines, right, that are to be feared and stopped. And so to try to undo that legacy is, I don't see it. Maybe I'm just too old to see it, or I'm just but it's a tall order to do that. And again, people are going to play the way they want to play. What do you think, Ham?
Well, you know what? Let me give you an analogy, right? So once upon a time, people used to eat food with their fingers. And then some genius created cutlery. And you had two people looking at that cutlery going like, wow, that's really useful. I can now be more comfortable eating my food. And the other person thought, well, I can use that to hurt someone. Now, where's the problem in all this? It's in the perceivers. It's the person perceiving the construct itself, the tool itself. So my outlook on this is that simple, right? When somebody creates a fantasy setting, whatever it might be, wherever it draws inspiration from, it's a work of fiction to serve a fictitious story that's going to be told collaboratively around a table. It's not a political statement at its heart, anyway. Okay, at its core intent, it's not a political statement. It's a tool. It's the gun. Is the gun good or evil? You know what I'm saying? Well, refer to user. It's kind of like that, right? So this is kind of the idea. So this ongoing debate as to whether cultural appropriation is, you know, drawing inspiration from different cultures is some form of cultural appropriation or misrepresentation or whatever, is that, to me, like, pull your head out of your butt, dude. You know what I mean? Like, this is games, it's not politics, right? Or at least it shouldn't be. And even if the author intended it to be politics, but it's still cool, you know, it's like, well, I don't have to use it for whatever reason it was constructed. I'm going to take those ideas, that it was created. I'm going to take those ideas and I'm going to deploy them on my table the way that I want to deploy them. So this is where my core argument starts, right? This is fantasy. This is creative work. It's not just the right, it's not the right platform to sit here and discuss these nuances which can border the discussion of them could border on silly, to be frank. Okay, then there's the other dimension of it, right? Then which is the actual deployment of these tools, right? And the dilution of storytelling actually, and how these things. I mean, where WOTC are kind of going with this, I don't know. I think the days will show. Do I necessarily agree with it? I think they're hurting the players' potential to tell certain types of stories by pitter-pattering around, you know, the appropriateness of using certain tropes. And I think it's wrong. Like, here's the thing. Let's take an example, right? Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to use a real life example. I'll use one from way back in the heyday. So everybody loves Drizzt Do'Urden. I think that's a safe statement to make, right? The majority of fans of the Forgotten Realms and, you know, old school TSR and then WOTC love Drizzt Do'Urden. You know, that pariah amongst the drow, right? The ultimate good guy. Well, the reason he was cool was because he was the sore thumb in a culture of evil. And that culture of evil was a very interesting one. Spiders and the matriarchy and stuff like, you know, very progressive ideas for their time, I think. You know what I'm saying? For their time. But, you know, and out of it stems this absolutely wonderful, heroic character who only looks that way because it's juxtaposed against this like really vile, you know, antagonistic setting that he comes from. You know what I'm saying? And juxtaposition is a storytelling device. So how do you advocate freedom if you don't showcase the absence of freedom, whether in the form of slavery or indentured servitude or, you know, some form of repression or something like that? But you're storytellers. You want to tell an author that they have to now curtail the tropes that they want to, or the themes or the storytelling devices that are their bread and butter in the content that they create or in the stuff that they create? And I'd say, you know, more power to you. It's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And so when we take all of that, these two core ideas of what is it that we're really talking about over here, you know what I'm saying? And then finally, how do we use it? You know what I'm saying? And what our ultimate intention is to use it for, you know, saying it really comes down to personal responsibility. I would be much more concerned with my players at my table and how welcomed and how safe they felt playing my games, and that there wouldn't be any curveballs or surprises. The level of grit can be amped up or jacked down based on a mutual conversation and consensus that we can reach, because that's the extent of my responsibility as the host of the game to my guests at my table. And that's the way I look at it. But come to me and say, don't talk about slavery, or don't, you know, like, don't use stereotypes that are like, you know, that can imply, I don't know, a gypsy culture, for example, you know, and some people say like, that's a bad word today. You know what I mean? Like, all right, fine. I get it. I get where you're coming from on that. Respect, you know, your opinion, but let's just agree to disagree, because to me, it's not a political statement. It's a trope that I want to use in a story to empower my players to tell fun stories where they can actually rise above certain stereotypes, perhaps, you know what I'm saying, or learn a few different perspectives about stereotypes. That's another thing also. The problem is always with the perceiver. Today, with people's shortened attention spans, there's almost this intrinsic desire, I feel, and again, this is anecdotal, there's this intrinsic desire to strip down complex issues to absolute simple forms and then relegate them to two sides of a spectrum. It's either black or white, you know, it's either 1 or 0. And they ignore all the shades of gray in the middle, because that's where complexity is. And it's lazy thinking. And these are supposed to be, but these are the people who are most vocal about, you know, their lazy thinking. You know what I'm saying? And they're oversimplifying complex matters, and you know, they're using kind of like a potentially using like bias to endorse a very limited view of a much bigger, you know, relevant topic. And it's a shame, but it is what it is. It's how people are, you know what I'm saying? Like for me, I believe the devil's in the details. I believe intention comes into it. I believe having perspective on as to what you're doing comes into it. And that's what it is, what it's all about. I mean, again, you go back to the what do you call it? Me, I love hopping back to the concept of heavy metal, but there have been heavy metal artists that have been, that have done terrible things. I mean, you can outright say they're terrible people and they've been incarcerated for it, or they, like whatever. They've done awful things. Their music's great. So let's separate between the artist and the art. You know what I'm saying? Can you do that? Because if you can't, while it's your prerogative, I think you're missing out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And that's how I see it. And it's the exact same when it comes to tabletop role-playing game content. And so now Wizards of the Coast is a company that's taking a corporate decision on that content. Yeah, it breaks my heart that, the legacy of the game that I kind of grew up with is changing. But then again, I felt that when, Third Ed came out, and, it was a game by any other name, I would have been fine, but this D20 system is not D&D. Where's my THACO? It's kind of like that, right? So it was, decisions like this will elicit emotional responses, but it falls to us individually to be responsible for that emotional response and be balanced in our view of it. And certainly stick to your guns. If you have a conviction, it's better to have a conviction than to be, decidedly undecided, right? But so have a conviction, that's well and good, but be open to the fact that perspectives will differ, and learn to agree to disagree. It'll do you a lot of good in your life to do that. Learn to agree to disagree, because if you ever find yourself in this situation where you're saying it's them and us, and if you're not us, you suck, you might want to check yourself. You really might want to check yourself, because your moral
someday they'll be the old guy. Someday they'll be the old guy with young people yelling at them.
It's and it's terrifying to actually see that kind of happening. You know what I mean? It's unfortunate, but again, it is what it is. It really comes down to you kind of balancing yourself. It starts and ends with you, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Because at the end of the day, whatever the content or whatever the debate surrounding it, you know what I'm saying? Like, you as the consumer, the person who's going to use it at your table, the onus of responsibility falls squarely on your shoulders there at that table in your deployment of that tool. And I think that's where you need to measure yourself. And as for the, there's a massive difference between debate and arguing. You know what I mean? And the way I say it is, I'm happy to discuss anything, any subject with anybody, not with the intention of them changing my mind or me changing theirs, but I would love to hear their perspective, and just so so I can expand my own thinking, so I can walk away from that discussion, process it, and decide if I've extracted value from it, or maybe I've imparted value with it. You know what I'm saying? But an argument, on the other hand, like angry, raving, and ranting, I mean, there's a saying over here, if you ever find yourself in a heated argument with a donkey, stop, take a breath, and ask yourself which one of you is really the donkey. You know what I'm saying? So it's and that's really what it bubbles down to, in my opinion. Don't waste your time. Like, if you're in a screaming fest with somebody, don't waste your time. It's not worth it.
And I wonder, like Nasser was saying, we've got a corporate entity that is responding to what they perceive as the largest subset of their customer base. And I always wonder, because Ham mentioned, these are very loud people, and I always wonder if their collective voices are loud, but there aren't as many of them as people think. Because I've seen some articles recently. One, I shared one with you where they were like, hey, suddenly the number one selling game is not a Dungeons and Dragons product. And I found another article a couple months ago where 5th edition stuff on Drive-Thru-RPG was dethroned by 1st and 2nd ed stuff. And it wasn't just like 1 or 2 books. It was like the top 10, 9 of them were 1st and 2nd ed stuff. And some people argue, well, it's just old timers trying to fill out their collections, and it could be. I saw that Roll20 released some statistics, because when you set up a Roll20 game, you set it up such that you declare what game system you're on. And I think there was a point in time where less than 50% of the games run were 5e. And that was a first time. So I wonder, I think that the average person will sit back and not say anything, and they'll just like be like, oh, I'll just try this instead because this isn't as annoying, you know. And that's probably 90% of the population, and then there's 5% on either end who are yelling at each other. And that's just my anecdotal again. I mean, I've been yelled at cons because I was the old white guy, you know. The person wasn't even at my table. They were just mad at the time because they had been arguing with someone else, and they turned to me and unleashed about how the game wasn't for me anymore. I needed to find something else. And I'm just kind of like,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I need to butt in here. I kind of need to hit the road.
Oh, yes.
You guys in mid conversation, but I need to head up to San Francisco of all places.
I'm sorry, Ashley. I forgot about that.
Hey, no worries.
We'll talk on Monday then. Is that good for you?
Yes.
All right.
Monday. Yeah, we will be talking. We'll be in touch.
Yes. Thank you.
It was good to meet you, Hamad.
Nice
Nice
to meet you.
Take care. Drive
Have a
safe.
nice trip.
Thank you. Farewell.
All right. But anyway, so I wonder, you know, how big of a populate, like how much of a dent is WotC think that they're making, or how much of a dent do you think upsetting that player base it would do to WotC? I actually saw somebody, it was actually, I think maybe it was a girlfriend of a friend of mine who mentioned, you know, we could do a boycott of WotC, but that would just leave all the nefarious players, you know, access to the company. And I'm kind of thinking, I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, I guess, in the long run. I know that what I do know is that the last time WotC tried to make a drastic change in the game was 4th edition. Some people loved it. The vast majority didn't, and they jettisoned it pretty soon with 5th edition. It didn't last very long. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Nelson.
Go ahead, Ham. Go ahead.
No, please.
I think, boy, like here's one thing I want to say, like overall, like whether we whether you agree or disagree with Wizards of the Coast, they are very important for the tabletop RPG scene, because if they're healthy, everybody else is healthy. I'll tell you why though. A lot of players came into the scene through 5th edition in recent years, like and not necessarily they're not staying with 5th edition. They moved on to other games and other systems and discovered like other gaming companies like Free League. Some people moved to Paizo, some people moved to the OSR. So them being healthy is very good for the industry. Just the point. Boycotting them, I think when you pick up the book, you can change stuff and run the game the way you want. That's just my point of view on the matter.
Yeah, and it's like a boycott to force the game down a certain path that you want. It's almost like the people that are advocating for that, you know, people are going to play the way they're going to want to play. And you're not going to control that, but control seems to be the point, at least in my view. And maybe I'm being short-sighted, and I genuinely think these people are coming from a position of, we need to change the world for better. I'm not sure that role-playing games is the place to do that, but at least there a lot of energy is being spent that could be spent on making real change somewhere else.
I'm personally a proponent for tabletop role-playing games changing the world for the better, but I don't believe that that's the monopoly of WOTC and Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's by virtue of tabletop role-playing games in general. The thing is, it's interesting, you know, you both hit really, really interesting points. Like, in terms of their decision to I don't know, just homogenize everything, I guess, for want of a better word. That's a gross oversimplification of what's kind of going on. And kind of diluting the identities of some of the monstrous races. Now they're being treated more as kind of like, well, I'm not even sure, because they're not player character races, but they're not monstrous antagonistic races, or I don't know. I think, let's just say that, to my mind, it seems that this is something that's new water, it's new territory. The company's made a corporate decision that's completely in their control and outside of ours. That corporate decision was made on the back of whatever market data they've got. So whether it's the loudest reaching their ears, or maybe there's some substance that the loud are actually also the plenty, and therefore the most relevant commercially. Goodness knows. I say, for all we know, it might be the let's call it the the conspiracy theorists. I'm not actually naming names or anything like that. This is just sort of to push with the analogy. It might even be just one or two people's personal vision or agenda or something like that, right? It's their politics transposed across the greater industry. Who knows? We don't know. The point is, it's completely out of our control, right? And the thing is, like what happened with 4th Ed, time will tell. We'll see. I mean, we're already seeing a shift from 5th Ed into other games, which is not a bad thing. To me, it says that the overall population of tabletop role-playing gamers has increased. And so therefore the market for that has increased. And that, the interest, when I say market, I'm not even talking necessarily in commercial terms. What I mean is just that when you have so many more people that are interested, that means more content is going to be sort of wanted. And not only that, but also created. And to me, that's wonderful. I think that's an amazing thing. I think that's a very positive outcome of it. But, zooming back to the specific topic of are they going the right way? Are they handling this legacy in a way that, sits right with me? For the latter, I'd say no. But then again, I speak from a position of nostalgia and having kind of been around from close to the beginning and seen it go through multiple transformations. So it's not new. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, the beautiful thing about, old school D&D versus, the present day D&D is that today there are other games that replicate that old school feel. And I'm perfectly happy with that. As long as I can get my gaming fix in and meet like-minded people who are cool and who want to tell great stories and, do miraculous, wonderful things and change the face of the world and do stuff that matters and have agency over their lives and the destinies of others. Man, I don't care what setting or what game we're playing in, because that's kind of the that's the emotionality I'd like to see evoked at the table. I'm saying? And to me, that's what the tabletop roleplay games are all about. I recognize and acknowledge the importance of WOTC and the Dungeons and Dragons brand. But if they were to disappear tomorrow, I'd miss them, but I'd still have other games to play. You know what I'm saying? So let time take its time and let's see what happens. You know what I mean? For me, I like my orcs monstrous.
Yeah.
And, I like having certain cultures in my world that are antagonistic. They're supposed to rub you the wrong way. You're not meant to agree with them. You're meant to actually see very deplorable practices there. And it's not for the sake of extolling these deplorable sort of characteristics that I have them there. It's to actually create juxtaposition. Is to say, hey, there's a problem here. Now you, the players, do you feel incentivized to actually do anything about it? And if so, what? And where does it sit on the moral spectrum? Second, let's explore that together respectfully.
And I think my wife made a great point. She's like, it's not, and I think we've said this over and over again, but it's not something that can be adjudicated at the top, at the parent level. The individual games will police themselves. If somebody's a problem, you don't have to play with that person anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the level that it should be adjudicated at, is, the players saying this DM has some very crazy ideas and it's a little bit disconcerting. I don't want to be around it. Or this particular player is doing something that is untoward, and and that's the level I think it needs to be dealt with. game stores, the game store owner needs to be that person, that sort of thing. So
Session zero.
Session zero is all about that.
Yeah.
What do you call it? And not only that, the approach changes depending on what kind of game you're running. So if you're running an ongoing campaign, okay, you're playing with the same people over an extended period, and there might be very little to no attrition in players. Things like few people will drop out, maybe one or two will change or whatever. But so when you come to that agreement and that consensus at the beginning, it's something that you have to reinforce throughout your campaign, right? And you as the DM get to do that. Or if you're running the game in let's say, a hobby store or something like that, well, yeah, I would say a large part of what types of games should run there, or what type of games should be okay for the DMs to run in their ideas, need some kind of active monitoring so that, people don't get necessarily hurt. But the truth is, I still think it really comes down to the DM specifically prompting and facilitating for a very, very clear understanding of this is the game or type of game that we're playing. Where can we agree as to what's on the table and what's not on the table? You know what I'm saying? How, set that benchmark or barometer for, how gritty or just, fluffy your game is, whatever it might be, because they're all good. It's all good. If everybody can be happy with it, then it's fantastic, and let people kind of be themselves and express themselves as they will. That's
how you,
but yeah, in terms
of find. Sorry.
But I completely agree that, you have let's say, I'm not going to call them bad apples. It's not said that there are good people and bad people. What I mean is if you have radically conflicting personalities at your table, excise them. Honestly, I've gotten to a point where I have zero tolerance now. It was harder back in my early 30s and late 20s, but today I'm ruthless. I do this with surgical precision. If I have a difficult player in my group, or if I just have a group where the group dynamic, let alone the party dynamic, the players are not able to kind of get together cohesively, or they have a lot of personal friction and they bring that cack to my table, dude, somebody's gonna disappear, or I'm gonna flip that table and walk out myself. It's just, that's how it is, because your time is limited. You know what I'm saying? Time's finite, guys. Your time is limited. And you as the DM, if you're not having fun, then you're not at the right table. And if there are players that are going to suffer because somebody wants to have their vanity affair and make it the them show kind of thing, at the expense of other people's enjoyment, I'm not having it. It's just, it's not like that. This is about us. Not, there's no I in this. It's about us, right? So if we can all have a great time, that's my job to facilitate. If I can't do it for whatever reason, then I'm going to try and tackle exactly what's impeding me. And if that's not going to work, I'm going to call it a day and walk away and find a group that I can actually play with. So take the flip of that.
I want to jump in, Ham.
Go ahead.
Say something. I think what you're trying to say is there's player compatibility and there's player DM compatibility. Doesn't mean that most of the time, it doesn't mean that because you don't play with that person is bad. It just means that their style isn't compatible with yours. Maybe you're not the DM for them. Somebody else can be the GM for them.
That's precisely
and vice versa. So,
that's precisely what I mean. It's not about good or bad people. It's just compatibility. The compatibility between the players has to be of a level that you can have cohesion at the table.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left. So this has been amazing. First of all, I really enjoyed speaking to both of you. I really hope that you guys come on again. Open invitation.
Happy to anytime, Matt. Happy to anytime.
And
thank you.
And maybe we get on and run a game one evening. I've been in love with Free League Publishing for a while, and I ran an entire Alien RPG campaign.
Nice.
It was amazing. And The One Ring is getting ready to come out, which I backed on Kickstarter, so that should be coming soon. So, and Free League Publishing is perfect for Theater of the Mind gaming. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So if you haven't read it, I suggest it.
right back there. I got it. We've got a whole bunch of Free League stuff back.
I am Free League's advocate in here in Bahrain.
We like Free League here. We really like Free League here.
So Nasser, what do you got going on? What you got coming up?
So far, like everything's on hold for me, but I'm waiting on some stuff to be approved. And if it's approved, my name will probably be in one of the gaming company's books. Other than that, just enjoying gaming online, going on podcasts and channel, mostly gaming with Mr. Mean, and sometimes if I can get Ham from his busy schedule, I'll probably game with him online if I can catch him.
Busy guy over there.
Yeah, I haven't, I've literally not played, I haven't done any tabletop playing. I haven't played a single game in 4 months.
No.
I'm dying, Matt. I'm dying. Okay. But yeah, it's been a really madly busy period for me, actually.
My goodness. So what do you got going on that's keeping you so busy?
Man, loads of stuff. So like, okay, other than the day job and things like that, creatively, what I've got going on right now is, first and foremost, I would say, is Monsters and Memories, right? So like the game's kind of, it's basically, for those of you who don't know, it's an indie MMORPG that's basically being designed in the vein of old EverQuest. Okay. In fact, Sean Lord is you'll find his streams on Twitch as a loving robot. You can actually check them out because all the production of the game is actually live. Like you'll see it. We keep the fans and the viewers up to date, basically, as we do. You can also check the Monsters and Memories YouTube channel if you like. But Sean was actually part of the development team of EverQuest. Oh. And from way back in the day. And he's worked on a bunch of other games as well. Like actually, he's a well-storied person, if you will. But he's also a real treat to work with because he's got this awesome vision for the game. It's very nostalgic. It's very, I'm not an MMO gamer. I've only ever played World of Warcraft, and I think I did that for just a few years, and then I kind of packed it all in because it's such a huge time sink, and my time could be better spent in other things. But where Sean and I kind of met is basically through, our love of the same kind of music to start off with, but also it was all those old kind of all the old art from back in the heyday, the Fabulous Four, the Larry Elmore, Jeff Easley, Keith Parks, the Clyde Caldwell art that you saw, and even the earlier stuff, your Errol Otis and et cetera, and so forth, right? So it was kind of like on that level that they asked me to come on board, and they wanted me to be kind of an illustrator. They said, we think you've got the style for this. And, me being me, I was kind of like, yeah, really? Some dude from Bahrain, you dug me out of all people and want me to do this. But, it's kind of amazing. I'm not ashamed to admit that Sean made me realize that maybe I undersell myself a little bit too much. Like, I don't know, there's definitely, I'm definitely adding some value to the team. That's why I'm still on board, I guess. But I learned a lot about myself, but the point is that it's just a wonderful project. Like I'm so married to it now, and my role is kind of it shifts a little bit from illustration to world building. At the moment, I'm very focused on basically the world building element for the MMO, creating all the lore, hashing up those races and stuff like that. So it's kind of awesome to be able to create a setting that people are going to get online and play. Like, to me, it's just like mind blowing. But that takes up the bulk of my time, or rather, what time I have free to allocate to creative pursuits, I dedicate the bulk of it to that. In addition, I'm working with my partner James on Away from Center Games, and basically it's kind of proprietary content. So we've just signed with Goodman Games to create third-party content for their upcoming X-Crawl product, which is in the process of being kickstarted. I don't know if they've started the Kickstarter yet, but it's kind of it's happening. It's there somewhere, bubbling in the background, and so that's a delight as well to work on. And my capacity again is kind of, if not art director, but co-writer with James. James is the lead writer, I would say. I prefer to kind of leave the writing to him, but we create the ideas more or less together. So that's another thing that we're kind of working on. Then on top of that, I'm kind of fiddling away at doing my own game book.
Oh,
So I've
Nice.
been kind of
source book.
the Bahrain source. I gotta do that, right? Yeah, I should. But I have an interesting premise. It's nothing I want to open up right now, what have you. But that's also something that's taking up a little bit of my time. And what I will share with everyone is I want it to be 100% me. I want it to be my ideas, my writing, my system, and my art. You know what I'm saying? Like through and through. So just like 100% an expression of myself. And a tentative goal to have it drafted out by this year. I don't know if I'll necessarily release it this year, but I've given myself 2022 to, through whatever time I can kind of find, to plug away at it and get about anything from 300 to 400 paragraphs, which is 400 paragraphs is the average length of a book. So see how that goes basically. But those are the three main things that I'm doing creatively at the moment in my free time.
Blowing me away. It's amazing. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt, for having us.
Yes, and we will definitely want to have you guys back. And with that, I just want to say happy gaming to everyone out there. And Ashley missed her little closing thing, but we might just film that separately and tag it on the end. But because we love Ashley, she's a hilarious gal, and really trying to dive into the deep end of gaming, because she kind of lives out in a remote area of California where she doesn't get a lot of opportunities to game, but she's trying to make her own now. So we're helping her out in that front. But thank you, everybody. And with that, I'll go ahead and close. Thank you so much, fellas.
Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm.
If you like what we do here on the channel, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell, because it really helps us out.